Welcome back, students. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how we can use a QGIS plugin called QGIS2Web to create a simple web map. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is an area where this functionality in QGIS is not as polished as ArcGIS Online. But on the other hand, if you just want to display some data and let people have access to it, it's very much less complicated and it won't cost anything other than a few dollars a month for web hosting. And you can actually do some fairly complex stuff with QGIS2Web, so it's worth knowing and understanding what the capabilities are. So what I have here is a project that I've opened that has just some basic information that we've been looking at throughout this course. It has some vector data and it has a background OpenStreetMap data. And what QGIS2Web does is it allows you to author a map in QGIS and then convert that to a map that's accessible via the web. And QGIS2Web does its best, and I think it does a good job of using some of the properties of the map that you author in QGIS to set the properties on the web map. So some of the properties that it uses are things like the names of the layers in our layer list. So I'm going to change some of these names just to make it look a little bit prettier. We're going to remove this underline from Raptor Nest, for instance, and also the underline from Great Blue Heron data. And you can go ahead, if you want, you can go ahead and remove the underlines from the others, but I'm just going to leave it at this for now. Now, something else. Under project properties, we have a setting for a project title. And I'm going to change that project title to DJ Basin. And I'm going to put randomized in here just to make it clear that this data is not real. And this should be the title that's used for the web page itself that you'll see in the tab on your browser. And it may get used some other places as well. So I'll just click OK now. And then something else that I'm going to set for Raptor Nest is I'm going to set the scale dependency. So if I go to the properties for Raptor Nest, scale dependency used to be set in this general setting until recently. Now we find it down here under this rendering icon, and you see that I already have it set to 1 to 100,000 and 1. So any scale that's above 1 to 100,000, this Raptor Nest data is not going to show. And the reason I do that is that there's so much of it that it just obfuscates everything. That's one of the settings that QGIS2Web will also respect. So let's take a look at the Raptor Nest properties, and we'll go to this tab that's Manage Custom Forms and the Field Editor Configuration. In here we can set a couple of the forms properties. So under Available Widgets and under Fields, this PushJS_FI, I'm going to change that from a text edit to a hidden field because I don't want that to be displayed in any of the pop-ups in our web map. This latitude_Y, I'm going to change that to latitude. It just is going to look a lot better in our pop-up. And I'll change longitude_X_DD. And same thing for last survey. So I'm changing the alias to make these things look a little bit better in the end. Let's see, alias is going to be status. Change this to nest ID and this longitude. I'm not sure why there's 2 in here, but we'll make these hidden fields as well. Now, there are a lot of different widget types. I'm not 100% sure which ones are used in QGIS2Web, but I do know for certain that we set it to hidden, that we won't have access to that field in QGIS2Web. And so that's very useful. I'm going to click OK. And before I forget, I'm going to save my QGIS project to save the changes that I just made. Now, to get the QGIS2Web plugin, just like any other plugin in QGIS, you go to Manage and Install Plugins, and if we come down here, we'll find QGIS2Web, and you see I already have it installed, but if you don't have it installed, you can just click it, and you have an install button down here. And once that plugin's installed, we'll have a couple different ways that we can access the plugin. One is through this little icon here. It's called Create Web Map. And then also under the Web menu, now we have QGIS2Web option. And it's just Create Web Map. And when we click that, what that does is just brings up a dialog box. And the dialog box just allows us to set some of the settings for a web map. And so you can choose which layers that you want. We're going to have all our layers showing. You can choose whether you want them to be visible or whether you want pop-ups to be enabled. If you do have pop-ups, you can change some of the pop-up fields. And one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to change all of these to inline label. Except for this nest ID. I'll set that to header label just so you see what that means. But basically, with an inline label, in the pop-up, you have the label and then the data. And with a header label, you have the label, and then the data will be underneath the label, not in the same line. So we'll see that in a second here. I think everything else I'm going to leave the same. And we also have a choice down here of which mapping API we want to use for the output. And I'm going to use Leaflet. It's the one that I'm most familiar with. But if you are familiar with the OpenLayers JavaScript API, you can use OpenLayers or Mapbox as well. Now I'm going to click Update Preview, and we'll see here what the map is going to look like. And you can see if I click on the raptor nest, now I get a pop-up. And these first 5 fields are inline, so we have the label and then the data. But this last one, nest ID, is set to be a header label, and so it has the data underneath the label. And you might want to use that, for example, if you have a field that can contain a lot of data. There might not be room for it all in the same line, and so you may want to put it underneath or something like that. But anyway, you have a choice. You can also see that a map has a title right there, DJ Basin Randomized. That's the title that I entered into the project title under Project Settings. This little box here shows all the data, and it has a legend. You'll notice that, you remember we moved the underline for a raptor nest and for great blue heron rookeries, but we didn't remove the underline for BUAL, habitat, or linear project. So it's pulling these layer names directly from the layer names in our project. And you can set those to anything you want. Then under the Appearance tab, we have a bunch of choices. I'm not 100% sure what all of these are. I assume an address search would put an address search bar here if you wanted to have the ability to go to a specific address. I know the layer list, if I set this to none and click Update Preview, then we no longer have this ability to look at the list of layers. But if I set it to collapsed, we're back where we were. We have this list of layers. And I can turn these layers on and off. And you'll also notice that QGIS2Web does its best to keep the same symbology. However, it's not perfect. And one place where it's not perfect is with dashed lines. And I'll show you how we can fix that in a bit. But for right now, this dashed line doesn't look the same as the dashed line for a raptor's nest there. Now you also have the option to geolocate the user, so that will show the user's location on the map, and that can be handy. I'm not 100% sure what highlight on hover does, so let's look. I'm just going to click highlight on hover and refresh, and yeah, now whatever I hover over shows up in yellow. Or at least if it's a polygon, it gets a yellow fill. Doesn't seem like it does anything for these lines, but yeah, let's do something else. Let's make a measure tool. So I'm going to change this measure tool from none to metric. We also have a choice for imperial measurements. Update the preview again to see how that works. So there's my measure tool. Now I can create a new measurement, and so I could come over here, and if I wanted to find the distance, say between this raptor nest and this one, it shows me there that it's 1,245 meters. And I can keep going, and it will just add distance. And if you have 3 or more points, then it will also compute an area for you. So that can be really handy. And when I'm done, I'll just come down here and click Finish Measurement. And then we have some other options about scaling and zooming. the extent. I believe this is just the extent that's on when you open. Right now it's set to the extent of the map canvas, and so that's this map canvas here. I'm going to zoom out to 1 to 500,000 scale because it incorporates most of the data in this map, and so that's what I'm going to want my web map to open up to. And if I click Update Preview, we'll see that it respects that. And then under Export, we have a couple options. I'm going to choose Export to Folder. You can, if you want to set things up, you could have it export directly to your FTP site, so that would put it automatically to your web server. I've never done that. I always go export to folder and then I'll move the folder to my web server because I always want to test things out before I move them over. So the folder that I'm going to use is a folder called QGIS2Web. And you can see I've got a couple web maps in there already. And you can put that anywhere on your computer. It's up to you. But we have to know where it's going to export when we export our web map. And then we have a couple other options. One is to minify the GeoJSON files. So what QGIS2Web does is that it takes your data and converts it to GeoJSON files, because GeoJSON files are a format that's text-based format that makes it easy to send back and forth across the internet, and so it's a format that's used a lot in web mapping. And so it actually creates these data files when we export our map. And what minify does is it removes all the white space, and that makes the data file harder to read, but it takes less space. And the fact that it takes less space is going to make it a little bit quicker to send back and forth across the web. And then we also have some options for precision. And you can read more about this in the documentation. But precision has to do with how much it simplifies the data. For instance, if you have a polygon that has a lot of curves in it, every vertex in that polygon is going to take up space in our data file. And again, when we're dealing with web maps, the smaller the data file that we send back and forth, the better. So we have the choice to decrease the precision of our polygons to some degree to simplify them and maybe remove some of those vertices that are redundant or don't add much information, meaning that they don't change the shape very much. Because everything that we do in web programming, especially when we're talking about GIS data, which tends to be fairly large amounts of data, is a trade-off between accuracy and speed, because we're moving all this data back and forth across the web, which is going to be a lot slower connection than, for instance, loading directly off the hard drive on your computer. So we have some of these options you can play around with and see what works with you. But once we have all our settings set, I'm going to just come down here and click Export, and there we go. We have some progress indicators. Looks like it's all done. Tells us where it put it. So I'm just going to click OK. And then in my Finder window, I'm going to go to the location where I know I saved it in this folder, QGIS2Web. And you'll notice, if you look at this folder before, there were 2 folders in here. And each one of those folders contains the complete web map. All the data, all the JavaScript files, everything you need. Any images that you might have, everything. You'll also notice that these folders have a date stamp on them. And so we had 2 that were from yesterday that I made when I was testing this course, and 1 that has today. This is the one that we just saved. Inside that, we have some folders for data. We have some folders for CSS, that's cascading style sheets. If you're familiar at all with any kind of web programming, this should be more or less second nature to you. And you'll understand what all this is. We have a folder that contains some JavaScript, and that actually contains all the Leaflet files and all the Leaflet plugins, and everything else is in that JavaScript. And so we have a couple folders in here. That's all our supporting information, data, and code, images, fonts, and things like that. The main program file is this index.html. And again, if you're familiar with web programming at all, this will be second nature to you. But this index.html is what kind of ties everything together. It links when it needs to these other files, but all we have to do is double click on this and it'll open. Right there it is. See it open. It has a title that we gave it in the project settings, and we also see the title here. We have our layer list, and we can turn these layers on and off. If I click on it, I can see a pop-up that contains all the data fields for this, and again show you how you can set the labels and things like that right directly from our data. We have a measure tool. We have zoom bars. If we zoom in, once we get past that 1 to 100,000 scale, you'll see right there we passed it. So all of a sudden we have our raptor nest data showed up, and we can see the pop-ups for that as well. So that's that scale dependency that we set. So everything's working in our web map. And right now this is just reading everything from a file, but all you would need to do is move that directory to your web server, and you probably want to rename that directory to something like DJ Basin Web Map to make it easier to find from your website. I'm not going to show you how to do that right now because there's only so much that I can teach in a course, but if you work for a company, you can talk to anybody who has access to your web server and say, look, I've got this web map that I want to put up, and you can give them that file that you created and they'll know how to get it onto your web server. So it's accessible to anyone. Now, one thing I said I was going to fix is this symbology here that looks quite a bit different from the symbology in our QGIS map that we altered, this hashed line. And I'm going to go back and open this up in an editor. And so this is what the code behind this web page looks like. It's pretty standard leaflet programming, and if you want to learn more about how that all works, I do have a number of courses on WebGIS programming. One is just an introduction to WebGIS, and the other is called Display and Analyze Your Data on the Web with Leaflet. And those two courses will give you the background that you would need to really understand how WebGIS works. And that's really good background information you have. There's a lot of extra capabilities that you could add to this map now, even though it's very functional as it is. There's still some things that you might want to do. And those courses will explain how to do pretty much anything that you want, including down here, I see this little section that sets the symbology for raptor nest. And under this dash array setting, I'm going to change this from 1.5 to 5.5. And I will save this, and then I can come back and refresh this map. And there you see that this looks a lot more like how it looked when we designed it in QGIS. So that just set the spacing on the outline of these raptor nests. So you can modify these maps that are created by QGIS2Web. You do have to understand a little bit about how they work. And again, those other courses that I teach will explain a lot of it if you want to learn more, but it's pretty basic stuff, and I think it's something that anybody with some web programming experience, if you know anybody that has that kind of experience, that they can modify some things pretty quickly for you. So hopefully this is enough to get you started in creating some simple web maps for yourself and get your data out there on the web where it's accessible to other people.